I've been spending a lot of my scholarly time the last decade or so working on a translation of a philosophical text from the 2nd century BC called the White Mountains. And the short way of describing that text is everything that a modern emperor needs to know in the 2nd century BC. And that project, I'm glad to say, is now in production at Columbia University Press and will be out at the end of this year. And I've turned my attention to another Han Dynasty text, which also deals in political theory. And so I've been thinking a lot about political theory, political ideas in China over the long term. And so for this afternoon's session, I want to mention a few ideas that have a long history in China that I think are likely to continue to affect China's future, the future of Chinese society, Chinese government, Chinese development. This is not at all to say that China has not changed and will not change. There used to be a view that China was unchanging, and that was a widespread opinion in the West, that China somehow was immune from the processes of social and political change that affected other parts of the world. And of course, that was never true, and it's certainly not true now. China has changed profoundly, and as we heard in the panel from the earlier part of the afternoon, it changed profoundly just in the last 3 decades. Nevertheless, China is still China. Chinese culture has many continuities, and I think there are some things that are going to continue to have influence. And when I started thinking specifically about this afternoon's presentation, I took note of the fact that this past Thursday was the 20th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square incident. And I asked myself why that incident, which was so widely condemned abroad, did not arouse more opposition within China itself. The government of the PRC was able to win the propaganda battle domestically, if not internationally, on that issue with relatively little demurral. And that struck a lot of people, I think, at the time as strange, and it still takes some explaining. I think part of it is the key is the terminology that was used to describe it. And I would say that one of the great values of Chinese politics over the long haul, and the value that you see expressed in these early political texts, is a word called an. And an means peace, safety, security, tranquility, public order. And one of the basic responsibilities of government is to preserve that sense of an. And you see that word embodied or enshrined in some important places in China. The Tiananmen Gate contains that word, the gate of heavenly tranquility, for example. And that is what the government tries to promote. And the opposite of an is luan, which is often translated as disorder or chaos, but it has much more of a potent meaning than those words would suggest. Luan is a really bad thing. It is a breakdown of public order, it is barbarism, it is danger to life and limb, it is facing a future of trouble or maybe no future at all. And what the PRC government was able to do in the immediate aftermath of June 4th, 1989, was to say that the demonstrations in Tiananmen Square represented luan, that it was a threat to public order. These were not high-minded students raising ideals of democratic progress. These were people who were threatening to bring about a breakdown of public order in China. And on that basis, I think that a lot of people were convinced, well, okay, if the students were luan, the government had to take strict measures against them because the possible consequence of that breakdown of public order was very great. And I think that that's an important point to think about when we look at the future of China, because it gives the government of China a very big trump card. It is a license for authoritarian actions that resonates very potently with the Chinese population. people will acquiesce to rather authoritarian actions if they are on behalf of preserving the sense of security, public order, safety, a tranquil and hopeful future. And that trump card, I think, is one that we will see continue to be played in the future. And those of us who are not as persuaded of the virtues of authoritarian government are probably not going to like what we see sometimes. But this is something that the political tradition of China gives a very strong weapon to whatever government is in power. A corollary of that, or I say one aspect of disorder of Lan, is corruption. And Chinese political thinkers over the course of many centuries have wondered how to curb corruption, not simply because it is morally bad, because it undermines the other thing that I think we are seeing in since the 1980s. Confiscate somebody's farm, pay them a few bucks, they get lost, and a new building goes up. And that kind of corruption is the sort of thing that has been going on in China for a very long time. There were a number of very serious attempts in the imperial period to create structural pathways to deal with corruption. A Bureau of Censorate, so-called, a whole branch of the bureaucracy that acted as a kind of general accounting office to try to root out and prevent corruption at the official level throughout the country. But those attempts have not been very successful. They continue to not be very successful. I would predict that they will have a long reign of non-success in the future. And so that is a particular kind of disorder or disorderly behavior that I think we're going to have to see contended with by the Chinese authorities for a long time. And it's going to act as a drag both on economic development and a drag on the political credibility of the government. So this goes in opposite directions. To the extent that they can be seen as promoting safety and security and order, they get points from the Chinese people. To the extent that they do not curb corruption and misbehavior on the part of officials, they lose those same points. Another long-term theme that you find in Chinese political philosophy is the assumption on the part of governments of all stripes, whether imperial or national or communist, assumptions that it is okay for government to control the flow of information. This had very deep historical roots. If you think back to the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, there was a famous incident of burning of books and supposedly burying alive of scholars in 213 BC. Some people wonder if that really happened, but it is widely believed to have happened, and the belief is almost enough that the government had the right to decide what books could remain in public hands and what opinions could be held and what could be done with people who held those contrary opinions. And there are many examples of control of information that could be pointed to. There's a very large encyclopedic literary project in the 18th century producing a work called the Suku Shanshu, the storehouse of works in the treasury of works in 4 storehouses. This was an attempt to produce use of works of Chinese literature, many hundreds of titles. It was also a kind of literary inquisition, because if you passed muster, then your book was published in this very attractive uniform edition. If you didn't, the book was purged from libraries and purged from bibliographies, and not necessarily burned, but certainly people were encouraged to forget about literature which did not pass this imperial standard. I don't know of any serious political philosopher in Chinese history who thought that it was okay for people to think anything they wanted, or print anything they wanted, or read anything they wanted. It's just a constant in Chinese